At a family dinner, my brother-in-law mocked, "She's too dumb to handle money," as he bragged about his business. But when I walked into his office the next day and he saw the paperwork stating, "Congratulations to the new owner," he stumbled back and stared at me in utter shock. I never intended to ruin my brother-in-law. That was never the goal. But sometimes life presents you with an opportunity, one that forces you to decide who you really are, what you're willing to accept, and when enough is finally enough. For years, I swallowed my pride. I bit my tongue at family gatherings, smiled through condescending remarks, and let myself be the subject of someone else's arrogance. I endured it for the sake of peace. For my sister. For my parents. Until, one evening over dinner, Henry, the man who had married my older sister, mocked me one too many times. That night, something inside me shifted. And by the time the next day ended, Henry would no longer be the man he thought he was. Family dinners at Angela's house were never simple affairs. She liked to play hostess, ensuring every detail was perfect from the place settings to the wine pairings. Her house in the West Lake Hills area of Austin was big, sleek, and pristine, a place where money was meant to be seen. She had always been like that, even before she met Henry. Henry, on the other hand, had money before he had her. He owned a financial firm, or at least, that's how he described it. In truth, he had inherited a company from his uncle and expanded it with aggressive loans and risky investments. He lived extravagantly, private golf club memberships, first-class vacations, expensive watches he wore just to show off. To Henry, success wasn't just about having money. It was about making sure everyone knew he had it. And because I had none of those things, I was beneath him. It didn't matter that I was a financial consultant at one of the top firms in Austin. It didn't matter that I knew more about smart investments than he ever would. To Henry, I was just a salary worker, a woman too small-minded to take real financial risks. And for years, I let him believe that. That night, the dining table was beautifully set, the air filled with the scent of roasted lamb and fresh herbs. The conversation started light updates on work, vacation plans, and minor annoyances about traffic on the 360 loop. My parents were there, both in their 60s, content to just listen. Sam, my younger brother, sat across from me, rolling his eyes every time Henry opened his mouth. His fiancée, a quiet but observant woman named Laura, smiled politely but rarely spoke. Then, just as the meal was winding down, Henry leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "You know," he said, swirling his wine, "there are two types of people in this world. Those who understand how money works, and those who don't." Angela stiffened. She knew where this was going. I knew too, but I let him continue. "And Olivia, bless her heart," Henry said with a smirk, "has always been part of the second group." A quiet settled over the table. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Sam clenched his fork a little too tightly. Angela sighed. But Henry wasn't finished. "I mean, let's be honest here," he went on, grinning. "She's been working the same job for how long now? A decade? And what does she have to show for it? No business, no real investments. She just works." He laughed to himself, shaking his head. "Some people just aren't built for financial success, I guess." The air in the room turned thick, charged. My father cleared his throat. "That's enough, Henry." But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I had heard it before. I had smiled through worse. But something in me, something I didn't recognize, wanted to see just how far he would go. So I tilted my head and asked, "Is that what you really think?" Henry smirked. "Come on, Olivia. No offense, but finance isn't just about numbers, it's about strategy, risk, power. You play it too safe. That's why you'll always be working for someone else." I let his words settle. Then, slowly, I smiled. "You know, Henry, you might be right." He chuckled, raising his glass in mock celebration. "Finally, she admits it." Sam exhaled sharply, like he was holding back a response. My mother looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Angela rubbed her temples, already exhausted. But I just kept smiling, because Henry had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I arrived at his office early. Henry's company was in a sleek glass building downtown, all polished floors and expensive artwork that he didn't appreciate, but liked to show off. His receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Rachel, blinked in surprise when she saw me. "Olivia?" she said, pushing her glasses up. "I am Mr. Bennett isn't expecting you." "I know," I said, smiling. "I'll just be a minute." I walked past her and straight into his office. Henry was on the phone, mid-sentence, when he saw me. His brows pulled together in irritation. "What the HLL are you doing here?" he demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I set a thick envelope on his desk and stepped back. "What's this?" he asked, still annoyed. I didn't speak. I just watched as he opened the folder and started reading. The moment his eyes scanned the first few lines, his entire expression shifted. The smirk vanished. His skin, tanned from years of golf outings, lost all its color. He swallowed once, then twice. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the paperwork, like his brain was refusing to believe what his eyes were telling him. His voice cracked. "This isn't possible." But it was. It was very possible. Because the paperwork he was holding, it was the official confirmation that, as of yesterday, I owned his company. Not him. Me. Henry stumbled back, gripping the edge of his desk as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. No, 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 no. His breath came out in short, panicked bursts. This is some kind of mistake. This isn't, but it was. And I had made sure there was no mistake. I leaned in slightly, just enough for my voice to carry the weight of what I was about to say. You see, Henry, while you were busy looking down on me, I was watching you. And you? You were a terrible businessman. His jaw clenched, but I continued. Your debts were sky high. Your assets were leveraged to their breaking point. The bank was just waiting for the right moment to foreclose. So I got there first. Henry's mouth opened, then closed. His hands gripped the papers tighter, knuckles white. And then, the final blow. You don't own this company anymore, Henry. I took a slow step back, tilting my head slightly. I do. His body sagged, his breathing shallow. I had won. And for the first time in years, Henry finally understood exactly who I was. But this was just the beginning. Because the destruction of Henry Bennett, that was only step one. Henry didn't speak for a long time. His breathing was uneven, his face pale, and I could almost see the wheels in his head turning desperately, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I watched him clutch the papers, his fingers tightening around them like he could somehow will the words to change. This. He exhaled sharply, then let out a dry, humorless laugh. This is a joke, right? I said nothing. His eyes snapped up to mine. Olivia, I swear to God, if this is some kind of stunt, it's not a stunt. I cut in, my voice calm. It's legal. It's real. And as of yesterday, Henry, this company is mine. He let out a disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head. No, no, there's no way you could have done this. He waved the papers in the air. You don't have the connections, the money, you don't know how this world works. I smiled, and that seemed to unnerve him more than anything. See, Henry, that's where you went wrong. I took a step closer, just enough to make him feel boxed in. You assumed I didn't understand money just because I didn't flaunt it the way you do. You thought I wasn't capable of making moves because I never needed to prove myself to you. His eyes darted back down to the documents, scanning them frantically. He was still looking for a loophole, but he wouldn't find one. I had spent months preparing for this. Henry's company had been drowning for a while, though he hid it well. On the surface, everything looked perfect: big office, high-profile clients, expensive suits. But underneath, the foundation was crumbling. I had seen the signs early on. He had been taking out aggressive loans, shifting assets, using one investment to cover another. It was all smoke and mirrors. And as a financial consultant, I knew exactly how that story ended. So I watched. I waited. And when the moment was right, I made my move. Through a mix of silent partnerships and smart buyouts, I had acquired controlling interest in his company's debts. When the bank got tired of waiting for Henry to fix his mess, I was the first in line. The moment his financial house of cards collapsed, I was the one holding the deed. Henry swallowed hard. You can't just take this from me. I didn't take anything. I gestured to the papers in his shaking hands. You gave it away, Henry. You made reckless choices, you ignored warnings, and you buried yourself in debt. The only difference is, I was paying attention when you weren't. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes scanning the office like a trapped animal looking for an escape. You have no idea what you're doing. He snapped suddenly, as if convincing himself of it. You think running a business is easy? This isn't your little consulting job, Olivia. This is the real world. You don't know how to lead a company. I let his words hang in the air for a moment before answering. Then it's a good thing I've been studying you for years. Henry opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked like he had more to say, more protests to make, but I could already see the truth settling in his eyes. He had lost, and he knew it. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, his hands slowly lowered, the papers falling onto the desk in front of him. This isn't over, he muttered, his voice low, but I could hear the tremor underneath it. You have no idea what you've just done. I tilted my head. Oh, Henry, I said, my voice almost pitying. I know exactly what I've done. I turned and walked toward the door, feeling his stare burning into my back. Just before I stepped out, I glanced over my shoulder. You should probably start packing up your office. I offered a small smile. Have a great day. Then I left him standing there, stunned, as I walked out of his company. Correction, my company. I expected him to lash out. I knew Henry well enough to understand that he wasn't the kind of man who handled failure gracefully. He was arrogant, entitled, and deeply insecure. A man like that doesn't just accept defeat. And I was right. By the time I got home that evening, my phone had already blown up with missed calls from Angela. I stared at the screen, hesitating. I had known this would happen. I had been prepared for Henry's anger, his humiliation. But Angela? She was another story. I took a slow breath before pressing the call button. She answered on the first ring. What the HLL did you do? Her voice was sharp, breathless, like she had been pacing. I closed my eyes for a second, then leaned against the kitchen counter. I assume Henry told you? Told me? She let out a bitter laugh. Oh no, he didn't tell me. I found him in his office, practically hyperventilating. He wouldn't even look at me at first. And when I finally got the truth out of him, her voice cracked, frustration seeping through. Olivia, you bought his company? Yes. Silence. You bought my husband's company. I let out a slow exhale. Angela, you know I wouldn't have done this unless I don't care what your reasons are. She snapped. You humiliated him. Our entire family was at dinner last night, and now suddenly, today, you show up and take everything from him? I didn't take anything, I said, keeping my voice calm. He lost it on his own. I just happened to be in the right place to catch it when he fell. Angela let out a harsh breath. God, Olivia, do you even hear yourself? I pinched the bridge of my nose. Did Henry tell you how bad his finances were? Silence again. I knew the answer before she even spoke. He said things were tight, but he didn't tell you that he was months away from losing everything? More silence. Then, a shaky breath. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. I felt a small pang in my chest. Because I knew exactly why. Because Henry only values power, I said softly. And admitting he was failing? That would have meant admitting he wasn't as powerful as he wanted you to believe. Angela said nothing. I heard a muffled sniff, like she was trying to keep herself composed. For the first time in years, I saw something shift in her. Doubt. Real doubt. For as long as she had been married to Henry, she had been his biggest supporter. She defended him when he was rude, made excuses for him when he was arrogant. But this was different. Because for the first time, she was realizing that he had kept things from her. That maybe just maybe Henry had been playing her, too. Angela, I said gently, I know you love him. But you need to ask yourself, how much has he actually told you? There was a long silence on the other end. Then, finally, she whispered, I have to go. The line went dead. I let the phone fall to my side, closing my eyes. Angela was starting to see the truth. But Henry? Henry was about to fight back. And the war was only just beginning. The war was only just beginning. I knew Henry wouldn't take this loss lying down. A man like him, so used to controlling the narrative, so convinced of his own superiority, would never quietly accept that he had been outplayed. And I was right. By the next morning, the rumors had already started. At first, it was subtle. A few of Henry's former business contacts stopped responding to my calls. Some of our shared acquaintances in the finance world suddenly looked at me with cautious eyes, as if I had done something underhanded. Then, the whispers grew louder. Henry was telling people I had stolen confidential information to orchestrate the takeover, that I had manipulated the system, used shady tactics to snatch his company out from under him, that I wasn't smart, I was ruthless, deceitful. I could have ignored it. I could have let him shout into the void while I focused on running my new company. But Henry had underestimated me once before, and I wasn't about to let him do it again. 3 days after the takeover, Henry showed up at my office. Rachel, the receptionist, looked nervous when she buzzed me. Olivia, he's here. I smiled. Let him in. He stormed in moments later, his usual arrogance cracked, but not broken. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, but it looked a little off now, like armor that no longer fit right. I leaned back in my chair. Henry, I greeted smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? His jaw clenched. You think you're so smart, don't you? I think I'm capable, I replied evenly. He let out a bitter laugh, pacing in front of my desk. You know, I've been talking to people. Important people. People who don't take kindly to what? I interrupted. To a man gambling with other people's money until there was nothing left? To a businessman who let his ego drive him into financial ruin? He stopped pacing. His lips pressed into a thin line. I stood slowly, circling my desk so that I was standing directly in front of him. Let me tell you what's really happening, Henry. My voice was quiet, but firm. The people you're talking to? They already knew you were failing. They just played along because it benefited them until it didn't. He inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. They weren't loyal to you, I continued. They were loyal to your money. And now that the money is gone, so is their patience. I tilted my head slightly. And if you keep spreading lies, I might just have to start telling people the truth about some of your creative accounting choices. His expression faltered. He knew exactly what I meant. You wouldn't, he muttered, but there was doubt in his voice now. I gave him a slow, deliberate smile. Try me. For the first time since I had known him, Henry didn't have a response. He just stood there, his face twisted in barely restrained rage. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. I didn't hear from Angela for a week. She had always been slow to accept difficult truths. She was the kind of person who needed time to process, to grieve the version of reality she had once believed in. So I gave her space. And when she finally called me, her voice was different. Softer. Sadder. Can we talk? She asked. We met at a quiet coffee shop, away from the noise of downtown. She looked exhausted, her usually polished appearance slightly disheveled. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her sit with her thoughts. Finally, she sighed. I asked him, she said quietly. I asked him how bad things really were. If he ever planned on telling me the truth. I leaned forward. And she let out a humorless laugh. He avoided the question, kept trying to twist it around, make it seem like I was the one being unreasonable. She shook her head. And that's when I realized this isn't about the company, or even about the money. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. He doesn't respect me. I didn't say anything. She swallowed hard, then looked at me. You were right. He kept things from me because he didn't see me as an equal. He never did. I reached for her hand. I'm sorry, Angela. She took a deep breath. I told him I wanted divorce. I squeezed her hand gently. For the first time since all of this began, I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Relief. It didn't take long for the final pieces to fall into place. Without Angela, Henry lost more than just his wife, he lost the last piece of credibility he had left. His reputation in the business world was already hanging by a thread, and when the news of his divorce spread, people started to see him for what he really was. A man who had spent years hiding behind an illusion of success, only to be exposed as the fraud he always was. He tried to fight back, of course, tried to take me to court, tried to rally investors to start a new company. But nobody wanted to take a gamble on Henry Bennett anymore. His name was toxic now. He had burned too many bridges. By the time the dust settled, Henry had no business, no marriage, and no real power left. And me? I took his failing company and turned it into something better, something real. The irony wasn't lost on me how the man who had spent years mocking me for not understanding money had been the one who lost everything, while I built something new from the ashes he left behind. A month later, we had another family dinner. This time, it was at my place. Angela sat next to me, her posture lighter than I had seen in years. My parents were there, relieved that the tension had finally lifted. Sam raised his glass, grinning. "To Olivia," he said, his voice full of pride, "for knowing exactly how to handle money." I smirked and clinked my glass against his. Angela hesitated for half a second, then lifted hers too. And as I took a slow sip of my wine, I allowed myself to enjoy the moment. Henry was gone, but I was just getting started. Months passed, and life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. Henry, once a fixture in Austin's high society circles, had all but disappeared. He moved out of the West Lake Hills home, his prized mansion that had been more for show than comfort. Angela had fought for the house in the divorce, and to everyone's surprise, including her own, she won. Not that Henry could have afforded to keep it anyway. Last I heard, he was living in a small rental on the outskirts of town. No more private clubs, no more first-class vacations. He tried to start another business, but nobody wanted to back him. The investors he once boasted about had all quietly walked away. His name, once a symbol of success, had become synonymous with financial recklessness. In the end, Henry did what men like him always do when they have nothing left. He blamed everyone but himself. For the first time in years, Angela seemed free. It wasn't an easy transition walking away from a marriage, from a life she had spent years building. But she was rediscovering herself in ways I never thought I'd see. She sold the house, moved into a stylish condo downtown, and started working again, something Henry had never approved of. She had been an interior designer before she married him, but Henry convinced her she didn't need to work, that her time was better spent managing their social calendar, playing the role of the perfect wife. But Angela wasn't playing that role anymore. She was building something of her own now. And when she landed her first big client, a real estate mogul looking for a designer to handle an entire luxury development, she called me, breathless with excitement. "I did it," she said, laughing. "I actually did it." I smiled. "Of course you did." And for the first time in a long time, Angela wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. She was standing on her own. As for me, taking over Henry's company had been a challenge, but one I had been more than prepared for. I cleaned house, cutting out the toxic executives Henry had surrounded himself with. I restructured the financials, brought in new investors, ones who actually knew how to build wealth, not just spend it. And within 6 months, the company was thriving in a way it never had under Henry's leadership. It was no longer about flashy risks and quick money. It was about smart, sustainable growth. Henry had once mocked me for being too careful with money. But in the end, it was that careful strategy that saved the company from his recklessness. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't seen Henry since our last confrontation in my office. Not until one evening, when I stopped by a local restaurant to pick up takeout. He was there, sitting alone at the bar, nursing a drink. He looked different. The sharp, confident man who had once filled every room with his presence was gone. His expensive suit had been replaced with something far more modest. The arrogance in his eyes had been dulled, replaced with something I couldn't quite name. Defeat, maybe. He looked up, saw me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, he let out a small, bitter laugh. "Come to gloat?" I shook my head. "No need." His mouth twitched, like he wanted to argue, but instead, he exhaled and turned back to his drink. "You know," he muttered, swirling the liquid in his glass, "I never saw it coming. Not from you." I tilted my head. "That was your mistake." He nodded slowly, staring down at the counter. "Yeah," he admitted. "It was." For the first time in our long, exhausting history, Henry Bennett had nothing left to say. I took my food, walked out of the restaurant, and didn't look back. Life has a funny way of working out. Henry had once thought I was nothing more than an insignificant player in his world. Someone to be mocked, dismissed, underestimated. But in the end, it was that very underestimation that led to his downfall. And me? I was thriving. Henry had always said that I wasn't built for success. But standing at the helm of a company that was now stronger than ever, surrounded by people who actually respected me, I finally understood something. Success isn't about flaunting wealth. It isn't about power plays and arrogance. It's about strategy, patience, knowing when to strike, and when to walk away. So as I stood there, watching the city skyline stretch before me, I lifted a glass to the night sky and smiled. Because this was just the beginning.